Hello everyone and welcome back to part 3 of The Haunted House by Charles Dickens. And part 3 of this is about him moving in. Once having decided to rent the haunted house, he doesn't believe anything of it, and so he's going to try it out for himself. Here we go. It was in the middle of October when I moved in with my maiden sister. I venture to call her 38. She is so very handsome, sensible and engaging. We took with us a deaf stableman, my bloodhound, Turk, 2 women servants, and a young person called the Odd Girl. I have reason to record of the attendant last enumerated, who was one of the St. Lawrence's Union female orphans, that she was a fatal mistake and a disastrous engagement. The year was dying early, the leaves were falling fast. It was a raw, cold day when we took possession, and the gloom of the house was most depressing. The cook, an amiable woman, but of a weak turn of intellect, burst into tears on beholding the kitchen, and requested that her silver watch might be delivered over to her sister, 2 Tappingtop's Gardens, Liggs Walk, Clapham Rise, in the event of anything happening to her from the damp. Streaker, the housemaid, feigned cheerfulness, but was the greater martyr. The Odd Girl, who'd never been into the country, alone was pleased and made arrangements for sowing an acorn in the garden outside the scullery window and rearing an oak. We went before dark through all the natural as opposed to supernatural miseries incidental to our state. Dispiriting reports ascended, like the smoke, from the basement in volumes and descended from the upper rooms. There was no rolling pin, there was no salamander, which failed to surprise me, for I don't know what it is, and there was nothing in the house. What there was broken. The last people must have lived like pigs. What could the meaning of the landlord be? Through these distresses, the Odd Girl was cheerful and exemplary. But within 4 hours after dark, we had got into the supernatural groove, and the Odd Girl had seen eyes and was in hysterics. Now, my sister and I had agreed to keep the haunting strictly to ourselves, and my impression was, and still is, that I had not left Ikey when he helped to unload the cart alone with the women, or any one of them, for 1 minute. Nevertheless, as I say, the Odd Girl had seen eyes. No other explanation could even be drawn from her. Before 9 and by 10 o'clock, had had as much vinegar applied to her as would pickle a handsome salmon. I leave a discerning public to judge my feelings when, under these untoward circumstances, at about 10:30 o'clock, Master B.'s bell began to ring in a most infuriated manner, and that Turk howled until the house resounded with his lamentations. I hope I may never again be in a state of mind so unchristian as the mental frame in which I lived for some weeks respecting the memory of Master B. Whether his bell was rung by rats or mice or bats or wind or what other accidental vibrations, or sometimes by one cause, sometimes another, and sometimes by collusion, I don't know. But certain it is that it did ring 2 nights out of 3 until I conceived the happy idea of twisting Master B.'s neck. In other words, breaking his bell short off and silencing that young gentleman, as to my experience and belief, forever. But by that time the Odd Girl had developed such improving powers of catalepsy that she had become a shining example of that very inconvenient disorder. She would stiffen like a dyke fox, endowed with unreason on the most irrelevant occasions. I would address the servants in a lucid manner, pointing out to them that I had painted Master B.'s room with and balked the paper, and taken Master B.'s bell away, and had balked the ringing, and if they could suppose that the confined boy had lived and died to clothe himself with no better behaviour than would most unquestionably have brought him, and the sharpest particles of birch bromine onto his close acquaintance in the present imperfect state of existence, could they also suppose a mere poor human being, which, such as I was, capable by those contemptible means of counteracting and limiting the powers of this embodied spirits of the dead, or any other spirits? I say I would become emphatic and cogent, not to say rather complacent in such an address, when it all go for nothing by reason of the odd girl's suddenly stiffening from the toes upwards and glaring among us like a parochial petrification. Streaker, the housemaid too, had an attribute of a most discomforting nature. I am unable to say whether she was of an unusually lymphatic temperament or what else was the matter with her, but the young woman became a mere distillery for the production of the largest and most transparent tears I ever met with. Combined with these characteristics was a peculiar tenacity of hold in those specimens so that they didn't fall but hung upon her face and nose. In this condition, and mildly and deplorably shaking her head, her silence would throw me more heavily than the admirable Crichton could have done in a verbal disputation for the purse of money. Cook likewise always covered me with confusion, as with a garment, by neatly winding up the session with the protest that the house was wearing her out, and by meekly repeating her last wishes regarding her silver watch. As to our nightly life, the contagion of suspicion and fear was among us, and there is no such contagion under the sky. Hooded woman, according to the accounts, we were in a perfect convent of hooded women. Noises, with that contagion downstairs, I myself have sat in the dismal parlour listening until I have heard so many and such strange noises that they would have chilled my blood if I had not warmed it by dashing out to make discoveries. Try this in bed in the dead of the night. Try this at your own comfortable fireside in the life of the night. You can fill any house with noises, if you will, until you have noise for every nerve in your nervous system. I repeat, the contagion of suspicion and fear was among us, and there is no such contagion under the sky. The women, their noses in a chronic state of excoriation from smelling salts, were always primed and loaded for a swoon, and ready to go off with hair triggers. The two older dispatched the odd girl on all expeditions. They were considered doubly hazardous, as she always established a reputation of such adventures by coming back cataleptic. If Cook or Streaker went overhead after dark, we knew we should presently hear a bump on the ceiling, and this took place so constantly that it was as if a fighting man was engaged to go about the house, administering a touch of his art, which I believe is called the auctioneer, to every domestic he met with. It was in vain to do anything. It was in vain to be frightened for the moment in one's own person with a real owl and then to show the owl. It was in vain to discover by striking an accidental discord on the piano that Turk always howled in at particular notes and combinations. It was in vain to be a radathamathus with the bells, as if an unfortunate bell rang without leave, to have it down inexorably and silence it. It was in vain to fire up chimneys, let torches down the well, charge furiously into suspected rooms and recesses. We changed servants. It was no better. The new set ran away, and a third set came, and it was no better. At last, our comfortable housekeeping got to be disorganized, and I, wretched that I one night dejectedly said to my sister, "Patty, I begin to despair of our getting people to go on this with us here, and I think we must give this up." My sister, who is a woman of momentous and immense spirits, replied, "No, John, don't give it up. Don't be beaten, John. There is another way." "And what is that?" said I. "John," returned my sister, "if we are not to be driven out of this house, and that for no reason whatever that is apparent to you or me, we must help ourselves and take the house wholly and solely into our own hands." "But the servants," said I. "Have no servants," said my sister boldly. Like most people in my grade of life, I had never thought of the possibility of going on without those faithful obstructions. The notion was so new to me when suggested that I looked very doubtful. "We know they come here to be frightened and infect one another, and we know they are frightened and do infect one another," said my sister. "With the exception of bottles," I observed in a meditative tone. The deaf stableman, I kept him in my service and still keeping as a phenomenon of moroseness, not to be matched in England. To be sure, Don, assented my sister, except Bottles. And what does that go to prove? Bottles talks to nobody and hears nobody unless he is absolutely roared at. And what alarm has Bottles ever given or taken? None. Well, we'll see what they decide on and who they're going to invite to look after them, or look after themselves, maybe. Heaven forbid. Until tomorrow, stay safe, be good, most will be kind, won't you? See you soon. God bless. Bye-bye.